You don't believe in superstitions, but you still knock on wood. You still hesitate just for a second before saying something too good out loud. And somehow, these small, almost automatic rituals don't feel completely meaningless. Because most of them didn't start that way. They began as real beliefs, real attempts to explain the unknown, or protect against it. So where did these come from? And why do they keep showing up even now? Welcome to Charmed, I'm Sure, the cozy, curious podcast where we uncover the hidden magic in everyday life. I'm Jen, and each episode we get charmed by a delightful topic that brings a little enchantment into everyday life. Today, we're getting charmed by superstitions, and where some of the most familiar ones actually came from. How these small, repeated gestures have traveled through centuries to settle quietly into everyday life. Because these aren't just habits. They are fragments of older ways of thinking, stories people once believed that somehow never fully disappeared. And once you start noticing them, you realize they tend to appear in very specific moments, right when something feels uncertain. It usually happens right after something good is said out loud. Plans are working out, something feels certain, and suddenly there's that small hesitation. Like, maybe it shouldn't have been said just yet? That sense that saying it too soon might somehow undo it. It's why people say, almost reflexively, "Don't jinx it." The word jinx can be traced back to ancient Greece, where it was associated with a bird used in ancient love spells and enchantments. Over time, the meaning shifted into something broader. The idea that words or attention could influence what happened next. Across many cultures, there's been a long-standing caution around naming good fortune too openly. The belief that drawing attention to it might invite the opposite. And even now, saying something out loud can feel like it changes the moment, just enough to make you pause. And when something feels like it might shift, the instinct is often to follow it with a gesture. You've just said something hopeful, maybe without thinking, and almost immediately you reach for wood, a desk, a table, anything nearby. It's quick, automatic, and strangely specific. Knock on wood, as if the moment needs just a little reinforcement. This gesture is often traced back to ancient Europe, particularly within Celtic traditions, where trees were believed to house protective spirits. Forests weren't empty spaces. They were alive with presence. And touching wood was a way of acknowledging that presence, or quietly asking for protection. In some versions of the tradition, people believed you were either thanking the spirit in the tree or knocking to avoid attracting attention to your good fortune. Over time, the belief faded, but the motion remained as something we still reach for in that brief space between hope and uncertainty. But not all superstitions are about holding onto a moment. Some are about avoiding something altogether. A ladder leans against a wall, and without thinking too much about it, you go around, not through. It's one of those things people just don't do, even if no one ever explained why. In medieval Europe, a ladder resting against a wall formed a triangle, a shape associated with balance and the sacred. In Christian symbolism, it was linked to the Holy Trinity. To pass through it was thought to disturb something complete. And in more practical terms, ladders were often present at executions, so people came to associate them with misfortune in a very real way. So even now, it's less about belief and more about instinctively choosing to leave that space undisturbed. And sometimes it's not something you avoid, it's something that crosses your path. A black cat crosses in front of you, and for that moment, you notice. Even if you don't believe it means anything, it's one of the most well-known signs of bad luck, even if it's said half-jokingly now. In parts of medieval Europe, black cats became associated with mystery, night, and the unknown. Over time, they were linked in folklore to witches, sometimes as companions, sometimes as symbolic extensions of something unseen. In a time when the unknown was often feared, those associations carried a lot of weight. And yet, in other traditions, including parts of Britain and Japan, black cats were seen as lucky. Sailors, for example, sometimes kept black cats on ships, believing they would bring protection at sea. Which really makes the superstition less about the cat and more about how easily meaning can gather around what we don't fully understand. In other times, it's something small, something you didn't mean to do. Salt spills across a table, and almost immediately, you toss a pinch over your shoulder. Because spilling salt has long been seen as bad luck, and that quick motion is meant to counter it. Salt was once incredibly valuable, used for preservation, protection, and even currency. It came to symbolize purity, something that kept things intact, protected, and preserved. So spilling it wasn't just inconvenient, it was seen as a disruption, a bad sign. In many traditions, salt was used for protection, scattered at thresholds or even formed into circles to create a boundary against anything unwanted. So when it was spilled, tossing a pinch of salt over your shoulder, traditionally the left shoulder, was meant to protect you from whatever might follow. A small, immediate way of correcting the moment. It turns a simple accident into something you can respond to, a way of restoring a sense of balance, even if just for a second. And then there are moments that feel harder to dismiss. A mirror breaks, and immediately you feel a pang of anxiety. Even if you don't take it seriously, you've heard it. 7 years of bad luck. It's one of those superstitions that feels a little heavier than the rest. This belief is often traced back to ancient Rome, where mirrors were thought to reflect more than appearance. They were believed to hold a deeper essence of the self, a kind of reflection of who you were, not just how you looked. And with life believed to renew itself in 7-year cycles, breaking a mirror was seen as damaging that reflection, something that could take time to repair. In some traditions, people believed the damage would fade over time, as the reflection slowly healed. Others suggested ways to soften the effect, breaking the pieces smaller or burying them, as if restoring what had been disrupted. Which may be why it still feels like more than just broken glass, because it's tied to something more personal, not just an object breaking, but the idea that something about you has been damaged. And finally, there are the superstitions that live not in objects, but in time itself. It's a date people still notice and avoid. Friday the 13th. Plans feel slightly tentative. Some people avoid travel or delay decisions, even if it's just in the back of their mind. The unease around the number 13 appears in multiple traditions, often seen as irregular, just beyond numbers associated with completeness, like 12. 12 months, 12 zodiac signs, 12 hours. 13 breaks that pattern. Friday, in parts of European history, was already considered an unlucky day, associated with misfortune in various traditions. All over time, those ideas layered together. In some buildings, the 13th floor is skipped entirely. Hotels relabel it. Elevators jump from 12 to 14, not because everyone fully believes it, but because enough people treat it like it might be real. Just enough to hesitate, just enough to avoid it. And over time, a date on the calendar starts to carry a little more weight and that feeling, even before anything bad has ever happened. When you look at all of these things together, they all show up in the same kind of moment, when something feels uncertain, and your mind tries to make sense of that. It looks for patterns, something it can connect to what happens next. So when you knock on wood, or you say, "Don't jinx it," you're trying to influence the outcome. Because even a small sense of control, even perceived control, feels better than none at all. If nothing goes wrong, your brain remembers that. That's how these behaviors stick. So the point isn't whether superstitions are real. It's that they show how we respond to uncertainty. We don't like to just sit in it. We do something to make it feel more certain. And that might be why they've lasted so long. Not because people believe the origin stories per se, but because that feeling hasn't changed. That moment where something could go either way and the instinct to do something about it. Even if it doesn't change the outcome, it changes how the moment feels for us. And maybe that's the quiet magic in it all. Not the superstition itself, but the way we create meaning in those small moments. The kind of everyday magic we don't always notice. Thanks for getting charmed by superstitions with me today. And if you enjoyed this episode, follow the show to keep discovering a little charm, wonder, and inspiration each week. And if you're listening on YouTube, what's one superstition you still follow? Even just a little. Leave me a comment. And now it's time for practical magic. A small idea from today's episode that you can bring into your own life. The next time you catch yourself saying, "Don't jinx it," or knocking on wood, pause for a second and ask, what just made that moment feel uncertain? Because that's the point where your mind starts to assign meaning. And once you see that happening in real time, you understand exactly how superstitions form. Not as something distant or irrational, but as something your mind is still doing automatically. And that awareness gives you a little more perspective in those moments. So you're not just reacting to the feeling, but actually noticing it. Thanks for listening to Charmed, I'm Sure. And until next time, may every day bring a little charm your way.